Good afternoon. This is Sunday, the 21st of January, the year 2024. And during my meditations at McDonald's today, I, of course, reading a lot in the newspapers, or in this case, the internet, about the possible formation of a new Palestinian state. Now, 2 days ago, which was the 19th, I had predicted that World War III would start on the 20th. Now, this being the 21st, I have no choice but to change my narrative as follows. The Third World War has indeed started, and we just don't know it yet because I'm basing this on Pluto going into Aquarius. And Pluto goes, starts very little and then splits, it splits geometrically. So it's, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and, pretty soon it gets pretty big. And that's what Pluto is going to do, is going to escalate exponentially. Now, Pluto also means splitting. Well, I just said that, right? But in this case, I am referring to, and this is where my meditation, just as I got back from McDonald's and, came home here, it occurred to me, the Palestinian state is being formed as we speak. So I thought that up around 3 o'clock, and it takes me about 5 minutes to get my act together and turn on the computer and get a chart. So this is a chart for, maybe the ascendant is 1 degree beyond when I thought of this. Oh, the Palestinian state has indeed formed already. It's in the process as we speak of being formed. Now, one point, just looking at the what we're going to do is try to figure out where Israel is here in the chart, where the world is, and is the chart any good, and so on. Now, one of the rules of horary astrology is if you have on the ascendant less than 3 degrees, then it's too early to call the question. See? And sure enough, here we have 2 degrees of Cancer rising, which means it's kind of premature, according to that rule. That's not going to stop me, though. I'll go ahead and say what I have to say. We're talking about early degrees now. I mean, the whole point of this exercise a couple days ago was that Pluto entering Aquarius causes splitting. Now, we're not looking at the chart of Israel right now, but the Jews have always been considered in astrology a Leo people. And what anecdotal evidence do we have to say they're a Leo people? Well, they're in show business, for example. And I think that was the example that I heard when I heard some old lady, may have been Nora Forrest, or one of those great old ladies 50 years ago, that said, well, the Jews are a Leo people, and show business is one example of that. Now, I will say one thing further. Although most Christian religions are associated with the age of Pisces, the Piscean age, which began 2,000 years ago, and Christ, for example, is his symbol was the fish, so that that goes with the Piscean age, right? the age of Christianity. The Jews, however, are from the age of Aries. So their symbol would be the lamb. Aries. Well, Aries is the ram, but those are all sheep, see? The ram, the lamb, the sheep. That's the age of Aries. Now, we don't push them back further than that, because prior to that was the age of Taurus. If you remember the precession of the equinoxes, your ages go backwards through the zodiac. So you have your age of Taurus, and that was when, for example, the Minoans worshipped the bull. See, and that would have been from just basing on 2,000 years. Although they've got it figured out, it's more like 2,120 years. But from 4,000 BC to 2,000 BC would be the Taurian age, where they worship the bull. And by the way, did you ever notice the bull is still a very sacred symbol? Very, well, we would call that an archetype now. You notice whenever a boy starts painting, the first painting he makes is of a bull. Well, I noticed that once. I'm sure that doesn't happen every time, but that told me, oh, a boy paints a bull. Why does a boy paint a bull? Well, that's deep in the unconscious. There's something special about a bull. They're dangerous, for one thing. Anyway, that was okay. Now we're entering the age of Aquarius. Now, there's a big debate about whether that was, the flower children when I was growing up. Thought it must be 1970, and other more scholarly type of people said no, it was actually when, like the 1880s, when, among other things, the Salvation Army was invented, and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, and spiritualism. A lot of things happened just prior to 1990. And then, of course, some people say, 1914 is an obvious turning point. And they predicted 1914 before the First World War, those who were in that business of predicting a new dispensation. Not that they were calling it the Age of Aquarius at that time, but I've read somewhere that some of these new religions are Aquarian age religions. The ones I had just mentioned, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, the Salvation Army, which is a religion, by the way, among other things. So, today, I had this, it must have been the cheeseburgers, I don't know, but, something, they hit my stomach, and I said, the Palestinian state is being formed, even as we speak. So we're going to take a look and see if there's anything to it. Now, going back to the point, if the Jews are a Leo people, then the opposite of that, their partner in crime, you might say, their adversary, the people they most relate to are Aquarians, Leo being opposite Aquarius. And this is maybe not the state so much as the people. The people of, the Jews as a people are Leo. Anyway, that would be convenient if that were true, because here we have Pluto entering Aquarius, which is going to cause a split. And the split, the way I'm taking it is, now, 2 days ago I was taking this to be the beginning of World War III, which, still might be. I don't see any nuclear winter clouds overhead, but I'm out in the sticks. It may take a while for them to drift there. I checked the news, an hour ago, and nothing particular had happened. But anyway, now what does it take to form a state? Well, somewhere in the law books, somebody that was writing about international law admitted, he said, well, first of all, states are formed by the sword. In other words, you have a fight. No holds barred. Eh? And then once, it's pretty much established, okay, you do have a state, then people get tired of fighting, so they create a truce or a peace, and they, depending on the power relation between the parties, they create a contract and said, okay, you got your own country now, and we will be governed by law until we aren't. And that doesn't take much. I remember in 1990 or thereabouts, my parents and relatives were Slovenians. And, when I was a kid back in, let's say 1960, I said, well, why doesn't Slovenia have its own country? Why did it have to be part of Yugoslavia? And the wisdom at that time was, well, the Slovenians are so small. But guess what? And so small they'll never be able to pull it off. Well, guess what? Circumstances in the 90s, changed a lot of things. And one of the things that was changed was Yugoslavia, which was basically a British construct anyway. The British were realigning the world, the early 1900s. And, they created places like Iraq and Saudi Arabia. But among other things, they laid out something called Yugoslavia, which came in on the after Austria-Hungary and Germany were defeated in World War I. The Brits came in and laid out a new map. And a lot of our trouble comes from the maps the Brits laid out. But anyway, they did, and they said Yugoslavia will be a combination of, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Dalmatia, and Macedonia, and maybe another one, maybe Bosnia. So it was an amalgam of southern Slavic states. That was the idea. But anyway, so when I asked my mother, who was from Slovenia, couldn't Slovenia have its own country? He said, no, they're so small. Well, they're still so small, and right now they have their own country. Although economically, they're lucky to be part of a greater Europe, both in NATO, and I think they finally got into NATO, but they're part of the European community of trade and passport-free zone and all those things. So for the time being, we have a Slovenian state of 2 million people, and there are other things like that. And how did that happen? Well, because they said so. They decided, oh, well, the Slovenians, the way I hear the story, this is the unwritten truth here, the way I hear the story, that one night the Slovenians kidnapped all of the Serbian policemen and people that were the Yugoslav authorities that were bossing around Slovenia. See, they kidnapped them all, and then somebody said, well, that's against international law. Well, tough, right? You're starting a revolution. You can't follow the law then. Happens by the sword. So in this case, the Slovenians did it by stealth. They said, okay, they captured all the rounded up all the Serbians, kidnapped them, out of and Yeah. Hid them all in a large cave somewhere. My cousin Igor told me this story. And then they proclaimed their independence. And so the Serbians, who were sort of in charge of Yugoslavia, they said, well, we don't want that. So they called up the governor. Well, he's not here, you know. And they called up their various Serbians that were supposed to be running Slovenia, and none of them could be found. So the next day, you know, tanks were rolling down the street of Slovenia, looking for any Serbians they could find. But in the meantime, the Slovenes said, well, we're our own state now. And the Slovenians ran up into the mountains, and the Serbian tanks couldn't go up those hills. You know, they were made more for something like the Ukraine, which is flatter, and they couldn't get up in the mountains. So the Slovenians held out long enough and started their own radio station. And then finally what? Some countries that didn't like the Serbs particularly said, oh yeah, we recognize Slovenia as a country. And you know, later on the legalities would be ironed out. Okay, you're a state, you get to collect taxes, you get to join the United Nations, and so on and so forth. But at first it's more of a criminal matter, you know, to have a revolution. You do what you need to do, and if you don't get away with it, your heads would roll. And if you do get away with it, then all right, you got your own state. And I remember, I wasn't here, but there was something called the Declaration of Independence that the United States proclaimed themselves to be independent of England back in 1776. And that was a criminal act. As far as any law that existed, you know, because the law that existed was English, and naturally, it's not going to legalize a revolution. In other words, a state has first obligation, so to speak, is to itself and to keep its own integrity as a state, and you know, if this. And then the South, once upon a time, you know, 100 years after that, decided they wanted to make their own country, called the Confederate States of America. And again, it was the legality of it was decided by the sword, or by a war, which we call the Civil War. And then, you know, once the war is over, then the politicians start drawing up agreements and laws and protocols, and you know, but you have to start with the reality, and the reality was created illegally by one party, according to the laws of the other party. So, and so it goes. Now, the Palestinian state. Now, I think there is actually a horoscope for the Palestinian state, as conceived of by some folks. And for the time being, since I don't have that horoscope, although it is around, I'm going to make up my own. And now, methodologically, you'll say, well, why are you doing a horoscope for Alliance, Ohio? Because the Palestinian state certainly is not in Alliance, Ohio, except in my imagination. Or my intuition, or my inspiration. And I could have, with slightly more effort, made a chart for somewhere near Palestine right now. But since these are my own musings, we're taking it on faith that I got a brilliant intuition, say, you know, a light bulb turned on. And then we're double checking it with the horoscope. And then it comes ultimately, anything I say will, if I happen to have guessed right, I'll be famous. You know, until somebody from Lake County Astrological Association steals my idea and says, oh, they thought of it first, which has happened in the past, or whatever. And if I'm wrong, then it'll just be, you know, another old fart making predictions that don't come true. But in the meantime, if you bother to listen to this, I will show you my technique, my approach towards reading a chart, like, you know. Now, I see something here is popping up at me, and I notice if I put the pointer on, it doesn't make any difference. So we'll just have to say, if you look in the 7th house there, you see that pi circle, that's a horoscope, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7th house, there's a Mars is in 12 of Capricorn. And if you look right across from that in an opposition, there's Hades in the 1st house, which is in 12 of Cancer. So Mars, Hades. Mars is the god of war. Hades is all kind of terrible things, but also a link with the past. So we have to look at Mars, Hades, and see, well, what has happened there. Now, by the way, Hades is one of those trans-Plutonian planets, which may not even exist, depending on who you ask. But anyway, it moves slower than Pluto, so it moves very slow. And it'll be in 12, it'll be in, within a few degrees of 12 of Cancer for years. However, Mars is another story. Mars moves around the zodiac in 2 years. So, the sun moves a degree a day. Well, Mars moves a half a degree a day. But sometimes Mars really moves. Books, they move it. It moves just with the sun. But anyway, we're going to look up in our horoscope book here. See, Rules for Planetary Pictures by Witty would be his name, Witty. But I think they call it Vita. Mars plus Hades means what? Mars plus Hades. Fatigue, weariness, atrocity, vulgar acts to cause damages, base services, male servant, slaves, sudden attacks, murder, homicide, unusual death, serious illness, faulty or bad actions. Which kind of describes a nasty war, for one thing. Now, if you look at, like Alphonse Serre said, you can read the first 4 lines down, in other words, it says, if it were the midheaven. But as a matter of fact, you can read this for the midheaven and not be too wrong. To suffer through mean acts of others, quickly annoyed and weary, to be fed up, to have one another's fill, to be separated mentally through mean acts of others, to want to revenge oneself, an eye for an eye, to be disposed to atrocities or murder, ugly deeds which bounce back. All that kind of reminds you of Gaza, and then the Israel attack on Gaza, which, legally speaking, were reprisals for the attack that Hamas did on them. So don't forget that. But anyway, it is kind of ugly. And what it said there is people get fed up. And I think this is what's kind of operating now, is that people are fed up with this war. There's no end to it. Palestinians are being slaughtered. And even, Mr. Netanyahu's President Netanyahu's greatest backer, President Joe Biden of the United States of America, is getting a little fed up by it, or this is an election year. And by the way, this is an election year all over the world. Not every country, but quite a few. They say there's more elections being held this year than for a long time. So, but anyway, people are fed up with this war, and they're fed up with, Israel fighting Hamas like that, and so on. So that would be one thing. And they're fed up because of all the murders and atrocities that are going on. Now, when we look at Hades, that's the the murders, the atrocities, and it's in between Lowell and Kronos. 10, 12, 14. See, so there's a midpoint there. Kronos being the state. Kronos always means up, which means, but I mean, Kronos always in Uranian astrology represents the state. And Lowell, we don't know, but I'm going to say that it's either Mars or Pluto, because Lowell studied Mars and discovered Pluto. So if I would, because in this book they don't have the asteroid Lowell, or any one of 20,000 other asteroids, so you have to be a little creative. But Pluto plus Hades, in other words, if you look at, oh wait, that's not Pluto plus Hades, but I want to look at equals Kronos. Actually, we're going to say look at Pluto plus Kronos, the midpoint being Hades. Pluto. Evil changes caused by meanness and treachery. Evil changes caused by meanness. Now, treachery, that's interesting, because that means, nobody's said anything about treachery yet in the newspapers. They say, well, you can see the meanness and the atrocity, but treachery means that you made a promise and then you double-crossed somebody. Eh? So evil changes caused by meanness and treachery. Like Netanyahu would probably consider any talk by the United States, which is his best friend, about another state, a Palestinian state. Netanyahu would consider that treachery, because he would say, he'd call Biden and say, hey, I thought you promised that you were my buddy, and now all of a sudden you want to take away half of my territory, and undermine me, so that would be considered treachery, by Netanyahu towards. He would accuse the United States of treachery, although the United States is still his best buddy. Don't kid yourself. Okay, Pluto plus Kronos means what? Pluto. So I'm reading Pluto as Lowell. Okay, Pluto plus Kronos: development of ability or skill, examination, testing, apprentice, helper. Oh, master, development upwards. So Pluto is the idea of development. We're experimenting and developing to ascend in rank, change of boss. The kernel formula for the new rich or the self-made man. Changes in the form of government. Okay, government. So. And if you want to look at equals Mars, because Pluto, Lowell, Kronos equals Mars. Autocratic plans and acts. The activities are checked and watched. Equals Hades. Guess what? The failure of the own plans and activities. So there's a possible failure here. To be checked and watched by the secret police. To work one's way up. So only the. So with the Hades, we have the possibility that this new state, once formed, might waste away. That's in the first house. So to summarize, Chronos is the state. Lowell is a development, like Pluto. So the development upwards, or the proclaiming of a new state. With Hades, based on people's fed upness, and then opposite Mars, based on the fact that people are fed up with this war, and just parenthetically, I mean, people are going to accuse Biden of doing nothing, of standing by, if he does nothing, say. And I'm not privy to the conversations being held, but all I know is what I read in the newspapers and what I see on the astrology chart. People are fed up. Okay, however, that state may fail. It may, it may have been a good idea and disappear into the past. So that'll be my alibi if I'm wrong. Always Hades. Okay. Now, Mars is at 12 of Capricorn, so to work your way all the way to Leo, that's 18 degrees to 30 of Capricorn would be 0 of Leo, 0 of Aquarius. So Mars at 12 is it's more like 17 degrees to Pluto. Now looking 17 degrees in the other direction, that would put you at 25 of Sagittarius. And guess what's at 23 is Waldemeth, which is Lilith, and 28. So sort of somewhere at 25 you have the midpoint of Venus and Lilith. Now, Lilith can have a great effect on romance. And I'm saying that because, I mean, I don't usually think of Lilith that way, but it can be. It can be a great deal of personal magnetism and some sort of love which is not quite kosher. Venus, of course, is love. It's sweet flowers, and we know all what Venus means. But if you have Venus and Lilith, that's some sort of a left-handed love. Something wrong with it, or odd about it, or treacherous about it. And so we have that. We have Pluto, which is new beginnings, but Pluto also takes you underground. See, Pluto takes you down. Now, so the midpoint of that. Now, the other thing Pluto can mean is that if you read it in your personal horoscope, if a person has Pluto conjunct Venus in his natal chart, he is bound. He's the type that's going to fall in love with a foreigner, somebody from a foreign land, from a foreign country, from a foreign race. Way beyond the norm. Somebody from like India or some place like that. Pluto Venus. And then if a person has Pluto Venus, then we talk about, well, his proclivities are, say, that he likes foreign women, and men, but when everything's a little tainted, like Lilith would be, and Pluto, then we talk about his proclivities, see. And usually when they say this person has proclivities, that's usually like shame. Don't tell my mother, please. Don't tell my mother. Shame, proclivities. Now, so supposing you have these proclivities, And now, what does that mean when on these proclivities we have this Lowell, Hades, and Kronos? What did we just decide that was? Some sort of state. Oh, atrocities. So we have atrocities and proclivities. It can't get no worse than that, right? Atrocities and proclivities has led us to this moment in time. You know, the Palestinians do it this way. You know, the Jews do it this way. Kind of bad news, huh? Now, keep in mind that when you have Waldemar, this is also a Jewish woman. Lilith can mean a Jewish woman. And at some point, in the last few days, if you look at my videos, I said that, you know, on a certain date, in about the Ides of March of this year, that there would be a Jewish leader, a woman would become the Jewish leader, like the next Golda Meir, yeah? Now, what else we have? Here's Saturn on the midheaven. Not exact, and it's in the 9th house side of the midheaven, so it's in the hidden side of the midheaven. But Saturn does mean a separation. And we have Isis. And remember when we looked at, there's a video called the Jewish Girl in Israel. We had Isis being the gathering of peoples from all around, all over the world, of the gathering of the diaspora back to Israel. I think the chart of Israel had on the midheaven had Isis and the moon. So the moon was the peoples, and the Isis means the gathering together. Now Isis also means a woman who wants to raise her children all alone without the benefit of the father. That's another take on Isis. And that's why they say, you know, the Isis, they say the Virgin Mary is like Isis, or the Virgin Mary is the Christian Isis. And then you have, you know, statues, you know, popping up around Europe of the Black Madonna. But this is supposed to evolve from Isis. And the Virgin Birth. So because Isis, you know, created, she put her brother Osiris, her husband's brother-husband, that's how the Egyptians did things, including the gods apparently, you know. But her brother-husband Osiris had been torn apart by another brother, and now he's being put back together, and everything but the phallus was found. So she made one out of gold and impregnated herself, which is kind of like a virgin birth. See, so Isis is the planet of the virgin birth, the woman with the virgin birth. But it also means the gathering. But an Isis mother usually gets pregnant, and then she eats the husband, you know, or if you're a wasp or a bee or something, or you know, certain insects, the female eats her mate, or you know, otherwise gets rid of him, so he's not in the picture, and she raises her children all by herself. She's the divorced mother or the unwed mother, you know, but she takes charge, and that's the way she wants it, really. She doesn't really want a man around, bossing her around, interfering. So that's kind of Isis. But we have an interesting, and it is kind of on the angle. Now, my personal chart, see, that's right across my first 7th house. which kind of describes the sorry state of my life right now, say, which you don't care about, but separation for the reason that ISIS didn't want you around anymore. Now, separation, how do we read that to mean anything in the creation of a new Palestinian state? I think people would really like to be rid of the problem. First of all, Egypt, and I haven't heard anybody in Alliance, Ohio, saying, let's bring 1,000 Palestinians over. You know, we can fill up our empty houses, and the Palestinians will work cheap, you know, for at least one generation. And, you know, but I haven't heard any, you know, volunteers that say, hey, let's bring over more Palestinians to the United States. And Egypt feels the same way. They say, listen, we got enough of our own problems. We don't need these people. And you know, on the other hand, that's why, I don't know, it's been kind of amazing that people have been as callous as they are letting these Palestinians being, you know, killed right and left. But coming back to the Saturn ISIS, all right, now listen, sit down and shut up. You've got your statehood now, and we don't want to hear no more about it. We'll take this up in part 2 then.